Hi, my name's Phil. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor, a supervisor, and an EMDR practitioner. And today I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing a question that I often get asked by clients who come to me for therapy. Now, the question would be, why do I keep doing things that make me feel bad about myself or make people judge me? Now, there is a simple answer to this, but there's also a very complicated reason behind that answer. Now, the simple answer is usually, I don't want to generalize too much, is that the process is trying to maintain shame as the most dominant emotion in the body because that's the one you're used to, that's the one you can deal with, even though it's the most horrendous feeling you could imagine, with that deep-rooted sense of not being good enough, or that you're bad and that people are going to judge you. That's a horrendous feeling. But if that is easier to manage than another emotion hidden in the background, which is typically absolute terror, then the body will find ways to generate the emotion which is most easiest to deal with, or the one it can hide. It's quite often, shame is an emotion that people can hide quite well because, from the outside, people may look very confident. They may project a false self. They don't look as though they're eaten to the core with, inadequacies and fears of failure. They can present positivity. But people who are absolutely terrified, that's quite more obvious because their eyes are usually, like a panic response. They'll be shaking. There'll be much more adrenaline at use in the body. So it's sometimes easier for the body to hide shame. Now that's usually because it's been beneficial to hide the fear through some point in life. Now this issue is often generated in childhood by maybe feelings of abandonment if the child is rejected, neglected, or perceived that it's been abandoned because parents can't meet the needs that it's asking for. And of course the child, if it's not getting its needs met, might start to feel that I'm not worth getting my needs met, and eventually the fear of being starved by not getting the needs met gets overridden by the feeling of I'm not good enough to get my needs met, and the brain survives thinking in that way, so it's able to detach from the fear. So often people who feel high levels of shame often have deficits in fear in relation in certain areas. So they will do risky behaviors. They might do things that can be quite dangerous or illegal because the fear isn't there. But actually, if they get caught, obviously they can be shamed publicly if they're in court, if they're in the papers. But also they can shame themselves after doing the act. That, oh, what did I do? That I did that. That may not be seen in public, but that might be how they feel. But the way to manage that shame that they're dealing with there would be then to go and do something else that's shameful, because in that shameful act, quite often the brain will get a sort of an adrenaline junkie response. So it'll almost enjoy the energy that's being created by the immoral or unethical thing that is being done. So that creates shame, but it also gives you a sense of enjoyment while you're recreating new shame. Now, if you're always doing that to manage a deeper feeling that's behind the shame, the root feeling of terror, you're not going to get out of the shame. It doesn't matter what you do, you've got to deal with the fear. So first of all, you've got to work on rationalizing shame and fear and understanding those two emotions at a deeper level. Now, rule of thumb, when I'm working with shame and when I'm working with guilt and those two emotions, what I typically say to people is, look, you shouldn't feel shame unless you've been bad, and you shouldn't feel guilt unless you've done something wrong. Those feelings are there to sort of to be a guide to tell you, oh, don't do something bad, don't do something wrong. That's in healthy terms, that's what those emotions are there for. If you're feeling too much of those emotions and you haven't done anything wrong, then obviously there's something else going on. But also, if you're generating one of those emotions, via personal choice, obviously there's something going on there that isn't healthy either. But actually, if your brain is thinking, I need to stick with feeling the shame because the feeling of terror behind is absolutely unbearable. I'm never going to be able to do that because I could die, I could starve to death, whatever the belief was when the shame defense was generated in your earlier experiences. The brain is going to keep doing that. So the simple answer to this question is that the reason why we keep doing shameful things is because we're trying to avoid another emotion, but we keep maintaining shame, which actually sometimes is a worse emotion to deal with. People who come in touch with the original fear behind the shame, if they can get in touch with that emotion and feel it, which can be obviously an intense reaction if they come in therapy, if they come into that feeling, But actually, then they don't need to defend themselves from that feeling because they know it hasn't killed them. They know they've got different options in the present, but the brain is typically based upon, that belief that if I don't do shame here, you know, I aren't going to be able to cope with this feeling of fear. And often, that often does come from early experiences because I don't believe we're born feeling bad about ourselves. I think it's the environment that makes us feel that. But shame is like a moral code generating emotion that makes sure we step on the right tracks as we go through life. It's to make us stop being bad. So if we're getting pleasure out of doing things that make us feel bad, there's a dysfunction there. And actually, even though you're feeling that pleasure and that urge to do that's going to be massive, it's probably because you're masking a fear that a feeling that you just don't want to go anywhere near. And that's really sad because you could be destroying relationships. You could keep finding yourself in trouble with the police. There'll be all sorts of things that you're making bad for yourself. And actually, you just need to allow yourself to be frightened. Well, hopefully this has been useful for you. It's only a brief sort of introduction into this area. And there are other questions around shame that I'd also like to talk about, and I'll do that in future videos. So if you like it, please give it a like and subscribe if you enjoy how I talk about this stuff. And I'll put another one up soon. Thank you. Goodbye.